Coming to you from one of the amazing cities of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Peaceful Bryce Journey. Tied in with the popular recurring Out of the Dust Geek List on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we play that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 13. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Raw out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off both Fearsome Floors and Von 0 off 100. On the reaction segment, I'll give my thoughts about Z-Man Games' announcement of a 10-year anniversary edition of Stonge. On the What I Have Been Playing segment, I review Founders of Gloomhaven. On the Obscure Bryce Games segment, I review Alchemist. And on the Where's the Game Now segment, we take a look at Spirit Island.
Oh gosh, I'm fronting up on
I had a chance to dust off the Reiner Knizia classic Raw recently when my wife and I got together with my father-in-law to celebrate our 16th wedding anniversary. Yeah, playing board games definitely qualifies as wedding anniversary celebration. I last played it 1 year, 2 months, and 2 days ago. I've mentioned before how several years ago my wife and I had a Knizia marathon with the 40 or so titles of his we had in our collection. Many of them didn't age well or fit in with our current gaming trends, and we wound up making a pile of bad Knizia games that we got rid of, and good Knizia games we kept in the collection. Ra wound up on the good Knizia pile. So far, I've liked all of Knizia's auction games I've played, and I think it's a mechanic he consistently does well and interestingly. But because of the player count necessities, it's not a game that we get played often, which is why it got dusty this time. This is a game I played wrong the first couple of times I played it. I accidentally carried over the civilization tiles from one era to the next. Like most games, turns out this is more fun when played correctly. So this wound up being a big hit with my father-in-law. The Egyptian theme was attractive to him, and he played very well. Knizia games have been working out well with him, so I'm going to continue bringing those to play. I definitely wouldn't mind playing more Raw in particular, so I might even suggest more frequent repeat plays, which is not something I usually do. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Murray Fish, BGG username BuzzFish4, recently brought a couple of interesting games out of the dust. The first was Fearsome Floors, which he last played 9 years, 11 months, and 7 days ago, and currently rates it a 6 out of 10. As the name and the green cover suggests, this is a Friedemann Friese game, though one of his lesser-known ones. Murray writes, "The little fish and I played Fearsome Floors at a chum's house with his kids, and it went over really well. I played it ages ago and didn't care for it, though that was probably more to do with the group than anything else. Would definitely play again." The second game Murray brought out of the dust is a really obscure German-only hobby race car game called Von 0 off 100, which means from 0 to 100. Murray last played it 1 year, 4 months, and 10 days ago and currently rates it an 8 out of 10. He writes, "After a long hiatus, we also played Von 0 off 100, this time using the actual secret faction rules, and it worked really well. The little fish liked the challenge of not just getting their car over the line, but also working out who was driving which car. Again, when I could see us playing again soon." Thanks for the contribution, Murray. Vault 0 off 100 in particular sounds like a game my own kids would enjoy. I'm going to keep an eye out for an opportunity to try or acquire it. Reaction segment time. Z-Man Games announced last week that they were planning a 10th anniversary edition of Stonge. I'm kinda shocked this game has only been around for 10 years. Not because of anything regarding the gameplay itself, but because it's become such an icon of the worker placement mechanic. And icons sometimes appear older than they really are. There are not a lot of details known about what exactly will be included in this anniversary edition, but Z-Man has promised a double-sided board featuring new winter art and some new options for playing the bitter cold of winter, whatever that means. But that does hint at some sort of new gameplay elements. There will also be upgraded components, though the ones in the current edition are very nice-shaped wooden bits. I suppose the only step up from those are Stonemaier-esque pieces, but that's just speculation. Beyond that, Z-Man hasn't said anything else yet. So this continues a trend of successful games getting anniversary editions. Some games only wait 5 years, but the 10-year mark has been popular lately. I've been picking them up if I don't already own the game, like the sweet new edition of Container, but so far I've resisted the temptation of getting any anniversary editions of games I already own. But those have mostly been simple cosmetic upgrades. I'm still debating on the new edition of Notre Dame because of the 9 new people cards, since that sort of thing is way more tempting. A new board and new gameplay elements tilt Stone Age more towards the tempting side of things. I want to find out more, but for now, I'm thinking about it. This week on the What I Have Been Playing segment, I'm going to talk about Founders of Gloomhaven, which I recently demoed at Spielbound, Omaha's board game cafe. I had 7 heavy game fans show up and, fortunately, my friend Warren had his copy on him, so we were able to accommodate everyone. But by the time the games were finished, not one of us had a favorable impression of the game. Following in the wake of its unprecedented namesake, Founders of Gloomhaven was a hugely successful Kickstarter last year. There were a lot of Euro fans, myself included, that were salivating for a new Isaac Childress Euro, and jumping on the Founders Kickstarter was an easy decision and seemed like a sure thing bet. The Kickstarter delivered in a timely manner, and I dove into the rulebook right away. I could tell reading through it that this was a particularly heavy game. There were some vague points and some questions I had after going through the document, but I felt I had a decent grasp on things. There's a fantastic tutorial on BGG from user Paul Grogan. After watching that video and doing a mock setup and run-through, I was feeling pretty confident and genuinely excited for the demo. The teach was pretty brutal in a lengthy way. It took close to an hour because there's a lot to cover. So much information. But I feel like I covered everything in an orderly way, and there were actually a few questions that arose once we got started. But that's when the problems started. One of the games unfolded very slowly and gradually, painfully slowly and gradually. The game I was in unfolded a little faster. It just seemed like it took forever. I think part of the problem was the game lacked any sort of tension. It was difficult to get caught up in the awarding of a point here and a point there. The way points were awarded was part of the problem too. It just wasn't interesting. I don't want to take an hour explaining this game, so let me just briefly put into context how points are awarded in this tile-laying game. You see, there are 4 levels of buildings, and points are awarded in a trickle-down manner to each lower level that contributed to it. So, for example, when points are awarded for delivering a resource to a level 4 prestige building, the tier 3 resource that got delivered might be worth, say, 10 points. But of those 10 points, maybe 6 of them get trickled down to the tier 2 resources that contributed to creating the tier 3 resource. And of those 6 points, 1 point gets trickled down to each of the basic resources that contributed to making the tier 2 resource that contributed to the tier 3 resource that got delivered to the prestige building. So every single time points get awarded, the players have to figure out a formula of how the points get distributed and trickle down. See, that doesn't sound remotely interesting, does it? Despite my best efforts to make it sound remotely interesting. Part of that problem is the graphic design. The way this formula is represented iconographically on the tiles themselves is very poorly done. It's not very visually intuitive, and all my players agreed that if this had been better represented, maybe the game wouldn't have felt so tedious. This tedium translated into a complete lack of caring in the players. In my game, one player had a fairly comfortable lead. Maybe if the game had lasted longer, the other players might have been able to cut into it, but when one of the other players made a move that didn't really help anyone, but hastened the end of the game, none of us cared. We were committed to finishing the game, but we definitely weren't committed to being concerned with how it ended. Even the players who wound up winning, it seemed, were more excited that the game was over than they were about having won it. And that leads to the ultimate problem with this game. There's no satisfaction to it. The great complex heavy games out there are matched in their complexity by the satisfaction of the players in what they have accomplished, whether they have developed some grand network of rails, rebuilt the city of Lisboa, or created the most successful fast food empire. The satisfaction a player feels in having done any of those things is fun. But since Founders of Gloomhaven is devoid of player attachment to what they are creating, it is also devoid of satisfaction and therefore fun. Bottom line, the complexity of Founders of Gloomhaven doesn't match the satisfaction and fun derived from it. And that's why, in my opinion, Founders of Gloomhaven is, unfortunately, an epic fail for Isaac Childress that completely misses the mark it was aiming for. And it's also why it's my biggest and most expensive Kickstarter disappointment to date. It's going straight to the trade pile for me. Maybe I'll give it a try with one of the many people I know who backed this to help them get it off their unplayed shelves, but it's safe to say I won't be playing the game again with my own personal copy. Obscure Bryce Game segment time. This week I'm going to tell you about a game called Alchemist. Let me clarify, I'm not talking about the worker placement deduction game from CGE that uses an app. That's pluralized alchemists. No, I'm talking about Singular Alchemist, an obscure 2007 economic euro from publishers Abigo and Mayfair and designer Carlo Rossi. Carlo Rossi has quite a few design credits, but none of them are very well known. His most owned game is Haben Gut, which I mentioned as a contributor out of the Dust game a few episodes ago. Alchemist is a very unique game. Players take on the role of alchemists, publishing and creating potions to sell. To do this, they collect combinations of 5 different ingredients. On their turn, they can either gather additional ingredients, publish a recipe, or make and sell a potion from another player's recipe. And that's the tricky thing about this game. When a player publishes a recipe, they dictate how many of which ingredients go into it, and assign a price to it between 1 and 10, which they earn only once upon publication. For the rest of the game, a player can never use their own recipe. Instead, whenever another player uses it, that player earns the listed price, and all the publisher gets is one of the ingredients used. So this becomes a time-saving device for the publisher in that they, hopefully, will have to use the gather ingredient action less frequently. But there's a delicate balance to strike. Make a potion too difficult to create, or price it too cheaply, and no one will ever use it, and you'll never get any ingredients from it. But make it too easy, or price it too expensively, and you'll be giving other players easy points for the rest of the game. But wait, there's more! At the beginning of the game, each player is assigned one of the ingredients to specialize in, and at the end of the game, bonus points are awarded to the ingredients that were used most frequently, i.e. the ingredients with the fewest ingredient cubes left in play. This manipulation is super tough to pull off, and I've never done it successfully. I like this game a lot because it's so unique, but I am no good at it. This was one of the games my wife and I bought at the first Gen Con we attended together many years ago. We played it as part of the Mayfair Ribbon Quest that year, and found a used copy in the consignment store for a few bucks. This game is also available on Yucata, which makes its obscure status kind of surprising. But it's one of the least often played games there, and few people seem to be logging plays of it at all. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of the online implementation of the game. Alchemist is a briskly paced game, plays in under an hour, and the turn-based system of Yucata is not a good fit for it. But the game can be cheaply found on the secondary market though, so I suggest people try it out that way. On the Where is the Game Now segment this week, I'm going to take a look at one of the hottest games from last August, Spirit Island, the brutally difficult, super engaging, highly original cooperative game from designer R. Eric Roos. This was fulfilled from Kickstarter a year ago and debuted at 32 on the most purchased list a year ago. A year later, it's still on the most purchased list at the even higher position of 26. This is very impressive, especially for a Kickstarter game, and indicates the game is thriving in the retail market. Not making this a Kickstarter exclusive game was clearly a good choice for a publisher greater than games, and Spirit Island has become the biggest